Before you listen, if you enjoy the stories and want to hear more, then please consider subscribing. Most of you listening aren't subscribed, so please take this time to subscribe. Turn on notifications so you'll never miss a story and be the first to hear. You'll also be supporting me. Thank you. It was my first night as a security guard at the old cemetery, and I had the typical feeling of being nervous. The money was good, however, and I needed it, so I tried to push those thoughts out of my head. I had no idea what I was getting myself into, and the weight of responsibility was beginning to dawn on me. It wasn't just about protecting the grounds. I was also responsible for watching the morgue, where the dead rested before their final journey. No big deal, right? The cemetery was vast, with tall wrought iron fences surrounding the property and old, moss-covered tombstones dotting the landscape. Ancient trees loomed overhead, their branches casting eerie shadows on the ground below. The morgue was a separate building, tucked away in a corner of the cemetery. It was an old stone structure with ivy creeping up its walls, giving it a certain air of discomfort. My main task was to keep an eye on the morgue through a series of security cameras that were installed both inside and outside the building. The cemetery had experienced several incidents of vandalism in the past, and the management wanted to ensure that no one would ever disturb the deceased again. As the night progressed, the graveyard stillness was unsettling. I sat in my small brown little office, the home of the security monitors being my only company. I tried to focus on my job, but my mind kept wandering to the strange stories I had heard about the place. You know, the tales of restless spirits and eerie occurrences that freaks me out. I shook my head, trying to dismiss them as mere superstitions. Ghosts weren't real. Around midnight, something strange began to happen. The cameras monitoring the morgue started to flicker, causing the images on the screens to become distorted. At first, I thought it was just a technical glitch, but as the problem persisted, I realized I had no choice but to investigate in person. Taking a deep breath, I grabbed my flashlight and headed out into the chilly night air. The path leading to the morgue seemed darker than usual, and the shadows appeared to be moving, as if they were reaching out to grab me. I tried to convince myself that it was just my imagination, but the growing sense of dread was hard to ignore. As I approached the morgue, I knew right away that something just wasn't right. The air felt a little on the heavy side, and the silence was unsettling. I hesitated for a moment before ultimately unlocking the door, gathering my courage before stepping inside. The cold, sterile room smelled of disinfectant and acid, making me grossed out. I began to inspect the cameras, trying to determine what was causing the disturbance. As I worked, I had a strange feeling on the back of my neck as though I was being watched. And then, without warning, I heard it, the faint sound of laughter like children giggling in the distance. My heart raced, and my hands shook as I shined my flashlight around the room, searching for the source of the noise. There was no one there. I remember shaking so much. I almost dropped the torch. I tried to tell myself that it was just the wind or maybe some animal outside, but the fear was gripping me. I forced myself to finish fixing the camera, desperate to leave the morgue and return to the safety of my office. Every moment I spent in there felt like an eternity. Finally, the camera was working again, and I practically sprinted out of the morgue, locking the door behind me. I hurried back to my office, my heart beating like crazy. As I burst through the door, I was met with a sight that stopped me in my tracks. As I glared at the monitor, I saw an old man sitting in a chair within the morgue, staring intently at the now functioning security camera. I didn't know what to do or say. The old man didn't seem to notice me at first, and I just stood there, frozen in place, unsure of how to react. I couldn't understand how someone could have entered the morgue without my knowledge. As I tried to muster the courage to confront him, the old man suddenly vanished into thin air. My legs gave out, and I collapsed onto the floor, unable to comprehend what had just happened. I stayed there for what felt like hours, my mind racing with thoughts of ghosts and the supernatural. The eerie laughter from the morgue echoed in my head, and I knew I couldn't stay in the cemetery any longer. Eventually, the first light of dawn crept through the office window, and I found the strength to stand. The entire night had been a nightmare, and I knew I couldn't subject myself to another shift in this haunted place. I hastily gathered my belongings, my hands still trembling from the night's events, and left the office. As I walked away from the cemetery, I looked back at the morgue one last time. It stood there, silent and threatening, as if daring me to return. But I knew I never would. That night changed me forever. and I still strongly believe that something had been watching me the entire time. I never went back to that graveyard, and I never worked as a security guard again. The memory of that night still haunts me, a constant reminder of the unknown and unexplained that lurks in the shadows. I can't help but wonder if the spirits of the cemetery are still watching, waiting for the next unsuspecting soul to venture into their domain. Okay, listen to this. I had been working as a night security guard at a local school for several months when the incident occurred. My job consisted mostly of patrolling the halls, ensuring all doors were locked, and monitoring the security cameras. It was a quiet and relatively uneventful job, which suited me just fine. I preferred the solitude and peacefulness of the night, and the steady paycheck wasn't bad either. One night, while I was making my usual rounds, I heard a loud crash coming from one of the classrooms. The sound was so sudden and unexpected that it startled me, making my heart race. I quickly made my way towards the source of the noise, my flashlight illuminating the dark, empty hallways. As I approached the classroom, I mentally prepared myself for the possibility of confronting an intruder. Despite my nerves, I felt a sense of responsibility to protect the school and its property. I cautiously opened the door, my flashlight sweeping across the room, searching for any signs of a break-in. To my surprise, the room was empty. There was no broken glass, no overturned furniture, and no sign that anyone had been there at all. Confused and slightly unnerved, I decided to return to my office to review the security footage. Perhaps the cameras had captured something that I had missed. As I made my way back down the hallway, the sound of an alarm suddenly filled the air. My heart skipped a beat. I broke into a jog, trying to locate the source of the alarm. I arrived at the room where the alarm was blaring, my nerves on edge, and my flashlight cutting through the darkness. Once again, there was no sign of an intruder or any indication of a break-in. The room was as it should be, and the alarm seemed to have been triggered for no apparent reason. I silenced the alarm and took a moment to catch my breath, my mind racing with questions and jumpiness. As I exited the room, I spotted the school's janitor, diligently cleaning the halls as he always did. His presence brought me a sense of relief, and I greeted him with a nod. We exchanged a few words, spoke about the odd occurrences of the night, and he reassured me that he hadn't seen anything unusual. Our brief conversation helped to calm my nerves, and I decided to head back to my office to check the security cameras one more time. When I arrived at the office, I was relieved to see that all the cameras were functioning properly. I reviewed the footage, looking for any sign of an intruder or an explanation for the mysterious events that had taken place. However, as you might have guessed it, there was nothing unusual in the recordings, and I was left with more questions than answers. The rest of the night passed without incident, and as morning broke, I could feel a sense of relief. The strange occurrences of the night had left me feeling on the edge, and I was eager to finish my shift and to return home to my family. As I was leaving the school, I happened to bump into the janitor, who was just arriving for his day shift. I mentioned our conversation from the night before and thanked him for helping to calm my nerves. To my surprise, the janitor looked at me with confusion, and I kid you not, said that he didn't work at night and had just arrived for his morning shift. He had no recollection of our conversation, and his puzzled expression made it clear that he was telling the truth. A sudden but sharp cold chill ran right down my spine as I realized the implication of his words. If the janitor hadn't been at the school the night before, who had I spoken to? The realization hit me like a ton of bricks. I had been talking to a ghost. The thought left me with a feeling of anxiety that I couldn't shake. I tried to rationalize the encounter, searching for a logical explanation, but I couldn't come up with one. The janitor had been so real, so tangible, that it was impossible to accept that he had been nothing more than a specter. The experience haunted me for days, making it difficult to focus on my job. Every shadow and sound set my imagination running wild, leaving me on edge during my nightly patrols. I couldn't help but wonder if the school was somehow haunted, and if the strange occurrences of that night were connected to the ghostly janitor. I still tell people about this story, but they always say I had too much coffee that night. Alright, so let me tell you about this one time when I was working as a security guard. It was a few years back, and I took a job at this super old, creepy factory on the edge of town. This place had been shut down for ages, and there were all sorts of stories about it. People said it was haunted, but you know how that goes. I didn't believe any of it. But man, was I in for a surprise. My job was pretty simple: patrol the grounds, make sure no one was trespassing, and just keep an eye on things. Sounds easy enough, right? Well, it wasn't as chill as I thought it would be. The factory was enormous, with tons of dark corners and hidden spaces that gave me the creeps. I could never brush off this impression that I was being spied on, but I just chalked it up to my imagination running wild. One night, a couple of months into the job, things got really weird. I was making my usual rounds when I heard this strange noise coming from one of the abandoned offices on the second floor. It sounded like, I don't know, like someone was dragging something heavy across the floor. My first thought was that it was probably some punk kids messing around, so I decided to go check it out. I climbed the rickety old stairs, my flashlight cutting through the darkness. The closer I got to the office, the louder the noise became. When I finally reached the door, I hesitated for a second. I won't lie, I was pretty freaked out. But I had a job to do, so I pushed the door open and shined my light inside. The room was a mess, with papers and old furniture scattered everywhere. But there was no one there. The dragging sound had stopped, and now the only thing I could hear was my own breathing. I searched every corner of the room, but I couldn't find a single sign of anyone having been there. The whole thing was just weird. Feeling more than a little spooked, I decided to head back to the security office and check the camera feeds. Maybe I'd be able to spot something on there. As I was walking down the hall, I heard a door slam shut behind me. I whipped around, my heart pounding, but there was nothing there. Just an empty hallway and the echo of the slamming door. By the time I got back to the security office, I was seriously on edge. I started scanning the camera feeds, trying to figure out what was going on. As I was watching the screen, something caught my eye, a dark figure standing in one of the factory's main rooms. It was too far away to make out any details, but it was definitely a person. I knew I had to investigate, even though every instinct was telling me to get the hell out of there, so I grabbed my flashlight and headed back into the factory. The whole place felt different now, like there was a heavy, oppressive presence hanging in the air. When I reached the room where I'd seen the figure, my heart almost stopped. There, in the middle of the room, was a tall, shadowy figure. It didn't move, didn't make a sound. It just stood there, watching me. I couldn't see its face, but I could feel its eyes on me, and it made me tremble in fear. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, staring at this thing. I didn't know what to do. Finally, I mustered up the courage to take a step forward. As soon as I did, the figure vanished, like it had never been there at all. That was the last straw for me. I couldn't handle the thought of spending another night in that creepy factory, especially now that I had seen something I couldn't explain. I hightailed it back to the security office, grabbed my stuff, and left the building as fast as I could. I didn't even bother to lock up. I just wanted to get as far away from that place as possible. Once I was safely in my car, I called my boss and told him I was quitting. I didn't go into detail about what had happened. I figured he wouldn't believe me anyway. I just said the job wasn't for me and left it at that. He seemed disappointed, but he didn't try to change my mind. I guess he could hear the panic in my voice. After that night, I swore off working security at abandoned buildings. There was something with me that night, and I don't know what it was. Something that didn't want me there. I don't know what that shadowy figure was, and honestly, I don't want to know. All I know is that I never want to set foot in that place again. Sometimes when I'm lying in bed at night, I think about that figure and the way it seemed to just disappear. And I wonder if it's still there, lurking in the dark corners of that old factory, waiting for the next unsuspecting security guard to cross its path. I can't help but feel grateful that I got when I did, and that I never had to find out what that thing was capable of.
Thanks for listening in. If you like these stories and want to hear more, then please subscribe and like and support this new channel. We have more stories for you to listen to.